Hello, Dr. Egan here. We are about to get started with our semester together in General Psychology 101. We're going to start off by talking about Chapter 1 today. Stay tuned. The first question we're going to ask ourselves is, what is psychology? Psychology is the scientific study of behavior and mental processes. Behavior, of course, is how you act, behavior we can see. Mental processes is how you think, and that might include things like feelings and memory and our understanding of sensations. There are several areas or subfields in psychology, and there's really too many for us to list and talk about in the scope of this class, but I wanted to highlight a few that are probably ones that you may have heard of or heard of someone having this type of job. The first one we're going to talk about is developmental, and this is where a psychologist looks at all aspects of human growth. So from the time that the child is conceived, in the zygote stage, all the way till death, they study, developmental psychologists study the development of people. And so it includes their physical development, their cognitive development, and social emotional development. Physiological psychologists really focus on the biological bases of human behavior and thoughts and emotions. Neuropsychologists might look specifically at the brain and the nervous system. You can have biological psychologists who are interested in biochemistry or the hormones, any kind of impact of medication, illegal drugs, and behavioral geneticists are concerned with how heredity impacts behavior, normal behavior or abnormal behavior. So you can see within physiological psychology, there's actually a lot of subcategories in that field. Third one, experimental psychology. These are psychologists who tend to focus their energy in conducting research, and that research will take place on topics like learning, memory, perception, motivation, emotion, things like that. Personality psychologists study the differences amongst people on traits like social abilities. So think of whether or not somebody's introverted or extroverted, how conscientious somebody is, emotional stability, self-esteem. They might look at domains on aggression or how flexible someone is. So personality psychology is, to say the least, extremely interesting. And we're going to talk specifically about a chapter in personality psychology later on in the semester. We're also going to talk about developmental psychology too, so we'll revisit that. Clinical psychology is the study of psychology where the psychologist is interested in mental health issues. They might diagnose mental health conditions, they might determine the causes of it, they're likely to be involved in the treatment of a psychological disorder. Some disorders I can think of that would apply here might be depression or anxiety or schizophrenia. Counseling psychology is what we think of when we think of counseling. This is where somebody is interested in the everyday problems of adjustment. They might help support somebody as they're making career choices or coping with a breakup of a marriage, or they might deal with grief, or somebody adjusting to a life change such as marriage or going off to college. Social psychologists, they focus on looking at how our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors are influenced by other people and the situations in which we find ourselves. So we're going to actually talk about this in a chapter way at the end of semester, looking at how people can influence each other as far as persuade each other, how people influence each other when they're working together in groups. So that's something to look forward to. Industrial organizational psychology is the type of psychology that's concerned with issues within the workplace. So it might be selecting personnel, it might be training employees. It could be improving productivity. It could be managing the working conditions. So this is something you're more likely to see an IO psychologist who's working maybe in a corporate environment and are really trying to have businesses have compatibility between the work they need to get done and the employee standards or the employee's satisfaction. My field is not on here, I didn't include it, is school psychology. So on my doctorate is in school psychology, and that you're absolutely spending the majority of your time focusing on how to help children be successful in schools. And so you're worrying about their academic achievement, but you're also looking at their behavior, their social emotional development. So it encompasses several different areas, but typically school psychologists will either work in a school setting or maybe a private practice, but their focus is probably going to be on kids learning and adjustment in the school environment. You'll find that as we go through this class, each chapter we discuss, we always refer initially, sort of in the earlier portion of the chapter, about, refer back to the enduring issues. Okay, so the first three here, person versus situation, nature versus nurture, and stability versus change. So persons versus situation, this is where we're looking at to what extent behavior is caused by internal processes. Okay, so things like thoughts, your emotions, your motives, your values. We're trying to determine, are we sort of the people or the masters of our fate, or are we more victims of our circumstances? Nature versus nurture, this is where we're looking at the relationship between heredity, like your genes, versus your environment, okay, your experience on thoughts and behavior. So sometimes we can see that there's a genetic influence to a situation, but whether or not that genetic influence plays out depends on the characteristics of the person. So we're going to revisit this. You'll find there's a lot of opportunities to talk about nature versus nurture. Stability versus change. This is definitely something that when we talk about developmental psychology, we'll focus on, but it's figuring out whether the characteristics that we demonstrate are characteristics that remain permanent and fixed as part of our process through the lifespan, or is it something that changes, and it could be in a predictable way or an unpredictable way over the course of our lifetime. So this is relevant for developmental psychologists, as I mentioned, but it's also relevant for personality examinations, looking at mental illness and its trajectory, looking at how therapy has an impact on people. Two other enduring issues we'll discuss in this class is diversity versus universality, which is looking at whether or not our understanding of human behavior applies equally well to people across cultures. Are we alike because we're all human? Are we alike with others based on some aspects? Or are we completely unique from one another about certain things, such as cultural aspects or aspects of our society? Mind versus body is looking at the relationship between experiences, sort of internal thoughts and feelings, versus biological processes, such as how our nervous system interacts, or what's happening with our hormone system, things like that. So it's looking at that relationship between our thoughts and feelings and those biological processes. One thing to keep in mind throughout this semester is that psychology is a science, okay? Psychologists depend on the scientific method, and they use this method in order to describe how to understand, how to make predictions, and eventually the idea is that there's some sort of control that can be gained over what they're studying. So there's steps here to the scientific method. The first step is collecting data, okay? And so we take that data and we look it over and we come up with some sort of theory to explain our data, some sort of explanation, okay? So this is where you're breaking down the data, you're organizing what you know about it, you're making predictions about new aspects or things that are unexpected. And from there, you start to create a hypothesis. Okay, this hypothesis is based on the information you initially have, and you're coming up with a prediction. That's something that can be tested. It's something that you can create a study and assess whether or not there's a relationship that can be seen. Okay, once that is determined, like once you determine that there's a way that you can test it, then you go about and you implement that experiment to see, is this hypothesis valid, or is there truth to it? Is there something that relates back to what you think you know? So an example might be, we have some data that indicates that freshmen who play a team sport are more likely to complete their freshman year successfully than those who don't. Okay, so successful, we might say, is somebody who earns all passing grades. So our theory is that these freshmen who play a team sport are more successful because they have more social connectedness and they feel more invested in their experience as a college student. So what we might do is we might compare, as part of our testable hypothesis, we might compare the level of social connectedness among students who play on a sports team and compare those with those who don't, and see if what we expect to be true. We expect that scores among students who play sports, we expect it to be higher. So we might give some sort of test, create a test in order to compare people's feelings of connectedness. Okay, so we're going to give this test to some people who play sports and determine their feeling of connectedness, and give this test to people who don't play sports and see what their level of connectedness is, and see if there's any kind of correlation or if there's any kind of evidence to suggest that our hypothesis, when we tested it, was valid. Throughout the process of studying in the field of psychology, there's this concept of critical thinking. And this is where you have somebody who is willing to take the information, approach it with the mindset of being objective and being cautious, and challenging assumptions that may have been present and need to be pushed aside for something new. So an assumption here in this situation we're talking about with the sports is, we might say, because I play a sport and it's a positive experience, I assume that all students who play sports are going to feel it's positive, and have it be a positive aspect of their college experience. However, we always have to make sure that we consider alternatives and don't go to sort of the obvious, simple choice. So maybe it's, an alternate theory or hypothesis might be maybe that student success is related to their financial support they receive, because they might be students who receive scholarship money. Maybe it's related to the fact that in order to play on the team, you have to get passing grades, and so that's their motivation, and it really doesn't have anything to do with social connectedness. But recognize that finding out more and investigating, okay, what is it about this relationship between students who play a sport having a more successful experience as far as grades and such? Like, why is this important? What can be impacted here? Is the dropout rate something that we can manipulate or control based on understanding these factors?